Well, hello everybody. Welcome to the channel and welcome to the shop today. There is something that I've been working on for a little while. It was one of the things to do during the winter break, and that is focus stacking or picture stacking, so that when you take several photos of something that has a very shallow depth of field, that you're able to basically see the whole depth of field when you take pictures of something that's rather small. And that's something that sometimes I think a lot of people miss when they're out rock hounding, when they're out looking at stuff, is they miss looking at the details. And there's a lot of fascinating things that can be found there. So when you're out looking at different rocks, take a loupe with you, just an inexpensive magnifying glass, and you're able to see some of the most intricate details with that. But if you want to share that, then it's a little harder. And granted, I don't have a very fancy setup here. I'm actually going to be using a kid's microscope, something that I've had on hand, and that has a camera that has about 2 megapixels. So it's not a fancy setup at all. But I played around with it a little bit last night with some low resolution shots, and I found the results were really quite nice. And a big shout out to Currently Rockhounding. I'll put a link down in the description below, but they have a really nice article on the website describing how to do the process. I'm by no means an expert. I'm just sharing my experience here. And of course, things are always going to look better the glass that you put in front of the lens. And so I'm going to try a couple of things. I'll use my kid's microscope with the little camera that's attached to it. I'll take some shots of various things, and I'll show you what those are in just a moment. And then I'm also going to put them, and it's an inexpensive macro lens on my little Canon camera, and we'll do the same thing. It has a much larger field of view. For that, I'm quite excited, and I'm actually going to, it's on order. I'm waiting for it to arrive, but I've got a really nice macro lens coming for my digital SLR camera, so that should get some really nice shots. But in the meantime, what did I want to look at? Well, we went rock hounding all year and explored different sites. Some of them, my wife came home with big old yard rocks, but at the same time, there were a lot of intricate details that were just really quite neat. And so I wanted to have a way to capture that. So I finally gotten around to it after a year of thinking about how do I photograph this, right? So some of the things that we found and explored that are kind of interesting. In the Dalles in Oregon, we found a bunch of nice crystals, if it'll focus here, but some pineapple calcite crystals. But in that same road cut, right, the crystals are amazing, they're great. In that same road cut, there were tons and tons of mineralizations of all sorts of interesting colors: purples, blues, greens, yellows, and they're tiny, right? Little pockets, and they're really fragile. So if you just kind of dig around, they just crumble, they just fall apart in your hand. But if you're careful with them and package them up so that they don't break, when you look at them under the microscope, some of them are just amazing. And I'm sorry I'm not able to tell you what all of these are. That's something that, again, for the next year or so, I'll try to become a little bit better at identifying some of the things that I see. But it's a work in progress, right? Some of the other things that were really quite interesting. We visited the wild turkey mine near Cheel, and there's a lot of beautiful green serpentinite material there, and some of it is really nice and solid, and that's great for working and for cutting. But the things that always interest me is the things that get mashed up, the things that end up being stuck together with other minerals, and so you end up with something that is not gem quality, but you wonder what kind of forces did it take to assemble it that way. And when you look at it under the microscope or under a macro lens, there are structures there that otherwise you wouldn't be able to see with the naked eye. So we'll try to take a look at that. In that same place, I found what I believe to be an ash deposit. And again, it's very fragile. Hopefully it'll focus. But it's layered and it looks like it's all oriented in crystal form in one direction. So I want to take a look at that under the microscope and see what that looks like. All right. Just because you're going for one type of rock or one type of mineral, you're always going to find some other really interesting things. And it may not be something that you could easily show others or talk about or get to know, but it helps you understand what's above and what's below the deposit that you were looking for, and perhaps recognize it in other places. A few other things that were kind of neat. Just in my home area, here is some mica from the Newman Lake area. And of course it's nice and glittery and you've got these little flakes. But there's other mineralization here, and it just really pops when you throw that under a magnifying glass. So I want to see what that looks like. Another thing I got turned on to by currently rockhounding was some siderite crystals in the Fish Lake area. And so I've got some basalt with these vesicular pockets, and again, hopefully it'll focus, but all of these bubbly little deposits, these little crystalline growths in there. Under a microscope, they look fantastic. So those are some of the things that we'll look at today, and hopefully you enjoy. So here's just a brief view of the setup. Like I said, it's a really inexpensive binocular microscope. One of the eyepieces has been taken out, so this one here we're still able to view through. And then here I've got a small 2 megapixel camera, and of course there are much better ones available that Amscope makes, and the software that comes with it as well is quite good, as well as the stacking software, which I'll show a little bit later on. And I just have a couple of clamps set up from a chemistry set with a couple of flashlights, and that provides nice even lighting all the way around. And USB cable then imports that into my computer. And so what we'll do is we'll take a look at some of the mineralizations, and we'll take a series of stacked photographs at different focus so that we get the full range of focus. And you'll see that I'll play a short video of what you would see if you're just looking through the glass itself or through the microscope itself as you're adjusting focus. And of course your brain, in your brain it kind of stacks the images together. You know in your mind what the whole thing looks like. But if you want to show that to somebody as a single composite picture, well, your brain can't do that, can't reinterpret it. And so that's where the focus stacking software is really, really nice, because it takes all the various depths of field. You know, if you take, say, a dozen photographs at different focal ranges, it stacks them all together, and somehow it figures out what is in focus in each particular photograph, and then it gives you a composite picture that is quite nice. So we'll start with the first one. So one of the things that we can do is we can remove these little clips. We're not going to be using any microscope slides, and that's really what this is intended for. And this is also a rather basic unit, and so it doesn't have a huge stack depth. And so it's good for some smaller items. The other thing that's really useful is some aluminum foil, because what that allows us to do is tear it up and, where needed, crumple it up into little ways to hold things in position. Because, of course, none of our samples are going to be perfectly flat, perfectly even, and you want to be able to hold them in as flat a plane as possible so that you have something that is easier to focus stack. If it is too rough all the way around, too steep, you're going to get some aberrations in it. And so we'll start off with this one right here, and hopefully you can see that in there, but there's some really nice crystallization in this little eye. This is one of the pockets of minerals that came out of that road cut in the Dells. Okay, and then what I do is I find the first layer the first level that I want to be in focus, and I work down from there. And I focus, refocus, take a picture, refocus again, take a picture, and I move my way down the stack, if you will. And after all of those pictures have been saved, we'll import them into the stacking software, and it does the rest, and it does an amazing job at it. So I will show you some of the stacks and show you some of the final results, and I think you'll really enjoy it. All right, so I've got Zareen Stacker opened up, and I also have a window opened up that shows all of my files that I've been able to save while I was collecting the images for image stacking. And so I have them right here. I've highlighted the ones that are for that first image. I'm just going to grab them and drag all of them into the input files right over here. There they are. And I'll just move this file folder out of the way. And so here's our first image. You can see that the corner right here, everything is in focus, but everything that's in this void, in this little bug, is completely out of focus. But if we were to step through the images, we can take a look at the progression as we move through the depth of field. We get to have more and more in focus. So let's select the stack and align and stack all. And there are two options, two ways that the software works, Pmax versus Dmap. And if you open up the software, there's an explanation of the different algorithms that are used. And sometimes one works better than the other, but we're just going to select the first one here, Pmax. And on the right-hand side, you can see the image build. And there we are. Now there's going to be some noise, and that's just because of the shift that my particular lens has as I'm moving through the focus stack. There are some things that the software can't correct for, and you just crop that out at the end. So it has to take all of the images that are there, and they're not always going to align perfectly evenly. But take a look at the difference between the left-hand image where just a little bit was in focus, and now you've got this entire depth of focus between the edges and then several millimeters deep, the little tiny crystalline formations that are inside of that bug. Let's try a few more. Sometimes with really fragile samples, it's nice to keep them in the jar. As you can see, the material is really friable. And where this came from, there's also a good amount of asbestos in the area. So while I collected it in a spot where I thought it might be volcanic ash, I want to be careful with it. So I'm just going to keep it in its jar. It is friable. So, you know, as should be the case, don't breathe, sniff, and lick the rocks, because sometimes they can be a little on the dangerous side. However, if kept in their proper environment, handled with care, these samples are perfectly fine. So I'm going to take a few snaps of this and then do a little bit of research and see if I can identify the crystalline structure. It was kind of a thin wafer layer, probably 4 or 5 feet below the topsoil, and it wasn't mixed in with other minerals. It was just below the dirt that had accumulated over the last few thousand years in the area, and that's what led me to believe that it might be a volcanic ash deposit. However, it does have oriented granular structure, so I'm not sure. Anyhow, that's the fun of rock hounding and trying to figure out what it is that you really have. And when you're unsure, you can throw it out there to the community. You can keep looking, keep finding material that is identified, that looks similar. There's a lot of things to learn. So I will post some of the pictures and the collection as the frames are gathered together and image stacked. Well, that's about all that I can fit under this little microscope. So please stay tuned when my new lens comes in, the macro lens for the camera that I'm shooting on right now. I'll post a second video. I'll show you that setup and some of the rocks that I wanted to try to get some nice close-ups of. They'll have to go onto the macro lens. The microscope that I have has a very small window. It's about 3 by 4 millimeters. That's the field of view. And it's non-adjustable. I don't have different lenses I can swap in or out. Like I mentioned earlier, the quality of the glass and the amount of money that you spend dictates the kinds of things that you can do with those images. But I was really quite pleased with the results. Like I said, this setup is in the kids section under Amscope. I have it for a different purpose, but it turned out to be quite nice. Now, if you watch other channels, like perhaps currently Rockhounding, you're going to see a microscope that is far, far above what this one is able to do. But that's not the point. It's not the expense of the gear. It's the enjoyment that you get out of the things that you have. So if you've got the ability to peer a little deeper with what you've already got, by all means, there are a lot of free tools that are out there, such as the stacking software. And so I hope you enjoyed this video. If you're interested in things such as rock hounding and exploring nature around the Spokane and the Washington area, there's more videos to come. We're going to be doing some different things, building some of our own equipment, and also looking at different sites that are in the area to explore. Of course, it's wintertime right now, so we're trying to do all the home projects, all the shop projects, and hopefully you're doing the same, keeping safe. If you like this video, please give it a like and a subscribe, and there's more content coming your way. You all have yourselves a great day.